Next up, we have Daniel Rowe. Daniel, I spent a lot of time talking to Daniel on the speakers cruise because he has led the most fascinating life. When you see him at the break, ask him about the Chinese television program that he was an actor on when he was a kid. And then he went to school and he was a vicar, so like a minister in Britain for a while. And then somehow that propelled him into open source. And he opened a consultancy, and now he leads the Next Core team. And he's here today to talk to us about bundling strategies. So it's going to be super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. I wasn't paying attention. Was any of that true? I'm not sure it was. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real honor. And I'm going to talk about unpacking bundling. And I hope I am. We'll see how we go. My name is Daniel Rowe. I am an American living in the UK, in Scotland. and I'm a full-time open source maintainer. I basically get to do my hobby full-time, which is amazing. I'm supported by sponsors. And the slides might need to come up on screen. OK. You also missed out. I'm going to go back. I'm sorry if that offends anyone. But this was my opening slide. And I feel the cat deserves some love. It's not actually my cat. I'll show you my cat in a moment. But I'm a full-time open sourcerer. I don't know. I think we're all magicians in the web space. That's why I love it. You can make anything happen, if you can imagine it. So I'm an open sourcerer as well. I lead the team building Nuxt, which is a framework for building web apps. I'm on the team of Nitro, which is a framework for building servers, which we actually built as part of Nuxt, and is now it is a separate project now, which powers things like Solid Start, Handstack Start, Analog, which is an Angular meta framework, and hopefully others. I have a few other projects you might want to check out, like pagespeed.dev, which I was told by someone. I was told by someone it was the fastest client for Core Web Vitals they had ever seen. We were on the Google team, and I won't name names. And that is basically me nerd sniping you to go find out why it is slow and tell me later. And a few other things. This is my cat, Barley. And this is where I normally stand and work. I have got my coffee or tea, depending on the time of day. And Barley basically stops me from doing any work as much as possible. I mean, can I get a show of hands for how many people here have actually had to choose what you are working on based on the presence of a pet? I'm sorry, I can't code right now. The keyboard is off limits. I can read PRs. I can think. I cannot type. It's very real, a very real thing. Now, basically, I think it's an important thing before giving a talk that any speaker needs to be appropriately humiliated. Well, maybe not any speaker, but it's probably useful for me. So if you could just tell me whether or not you've used Nuxt, that would be a lovely thing. I would love to know that. I'm surprised at 17. Maybe that's because it really needed to be optimized. Actually, I also want to just highlight how intelligent I am. I've put the choices here as yes and not yet. I thought that might go unnoticed unless I pointed it out. That was a self-deprecating joke, just to be clear. I'm not actually saying. OK, thank you for letting me know. This, by the way, is so much fun, isn't it, to build stuff with the web? This is a few lines of code in my slides, which it connects each of these components to a WebSocket server. And when you go to the QR code, which is a library written by Anthony Fu, it redirects to my website, which sends a HTTP request to the WebSocket server, which updates my slides. Isn't that amazing? Anyway, I can't quite get over the fact that almost anything can happen, right? Nuxt. I'm not talking about Nuxt, but just to give you an idea about where I'm coming from. So Nuxt, this is our aspiration. We aim to be a progressive framework. The idea that you can start easily, and it takes you as far into the depths of complexity as you want to go. So you can get best practice built in, and you can customize it and add your own implementation if you need to. Now, a lot of what makes Nuxt unique is the fact that it is community-driven. So it was started one day after Next.js was released in October 2016. It was totally rewritten. We totally rewrote it in for version 3 in July 2020. We started work on, and now we're just on the verge of releasing version 4. And most of what makes Nuxt is that it comes from the community. We don't have, as I said, a VC-funded company backing us. We are directed by members of the community. I happen to lead the team, but that's not a sort of imposition of will. That is a case of recognizing what people are doing and hopefully aiding and helping with that. We have downloads on NPM, if I'm allowed to mention that. And we have some numbers of stars, but honestly what I'm more excited about is the fact that we have quite a lot of contributors and people who are helping build Nuxt, which is something I believe in. The building of Nuxt, as well as the fact that it's a group project. It's the joy of open source, right? That you can do things together with other people that are more powerful and impactful than if you were one person doing it on your own. Now, it will not have escaped your notice that I represent someone from the JavaScript world. And in particular, not just from the JavaScript world, from the UI rendering library world, not just from the UI rendering library world, but from the meta framework world. And so I am looking around for Alex Russell, and I cannot see him, which is probably a good thing. Because I want to say, well, actually, I don't want to say this exactly. I want to say that JavaScript is useful. And I hope that that would be something we could agree on. Because I guess, like many of us, I believe in a tree, that you have things that can be static, should be static. Things that should be server rendered, that can be server rendered, should be server rendered. Things that can't be, can be left to the client. And the same with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Things that can be done in HTML should be done in HTML. Things that can be done in CSS should be done in CSS. And things that need to be done in JavaScript should be done in JavaScript. And that kind of waterfall, I think, applies in a lot of different areas in web development. And just substitute your order of priority in terms of what you pick. I'm going to talk. Actually, I almost forgot about that. I should actually talk about what I want to talk about, which is I'm going to talk about 8 different ways that we are working in the bundler space to improve performance, and which I think might be relevant for all of us. Not in the sense of we've got it nailed and we should all do this, but here's what we're exploring. Because, if I could say something about frameworks, frameworks exist because there's a need. Because there's some kind of problem space, people are struggling to do something, or they're doing the same thing lots of times, and there is an opportunity to bring best practice in a scalable way to a lot of people, or there's an opportunity to improve people's experience, both at the developer and the user experience level, in a very profound way. Now, when those needs go away, the framework has to change and adapt, because the enemy of performance is not framework or UI library. The enemy is human behavior, and in particular the human behavior not to adapt and change. So the desire to remain doing the same thing we've always done is the enemy. And frameworks that do not adopt a change mentality and an opportunity to grow will inevitably fall into the category of holding back the advance of the web. But that's not the kind of framework I want to be, and I hope it's not the kind of programmer, developer, consultant that any of us want to be. We want to be people who learn from our mistakes, who are constantly iterating, experimenting, testing hypotheses, and getting better. And so here are some ways we are testing hypotheses. I hope people will come to me later or drop me a DM and tell me why I'm wrong on some of these, because I hope I don't want to be sensitive about that. I hope none of us would want to be, right? When our hypothesis is proven wrong, that's useful data. But I also want to suggest that there are opportunities that we are simply not exploring from the bundler and framework side to actually bring about web performance improvements on a scale that none of us can individually achieve. And actually, that's one of the things I'm most enjoying about this conference, taking notes and hopefully going away and bringing some of what I've heard from the stage and from people I've talked to back to the framework I maintain. So here is the bundle of your app. Except I want to challenge that. You might think that I'm going to be talking about splitting chunks of your bundle, which I totally could, because it's a really useful skill to look at your bundle analysis and figure out that there's a lot that's not used here, and let's see if we can move that there. But I actually want to expand the scope of what a bundler can do and think about to not that one line of JavaScript, but the entire document that's being rendered. And this is probably because I'm coming from a framework point of view. And actually, before that, I had a small software as a service startup. I'm coming from a pragmatic background, and I think that the opportunity we have is to integrate with bundlers in a way that transforms the entire application. So here are some of the things we're doing. Here's the first one: style inlining. Now, there are lots of reasons you might have to inline styles. Probably you don't have any reason in the case where you have a single style sheet. There's a pro and con, right? So a style sheet can be cached. On the other hand, it delays slightly the browser's ability to process what's inside that style sheet. When you have lots of style sheets, not 3, but 10, which can happen when you have lots of components used on a page, each of which, for example, might bring their own style sheet. It starts becoming a waste of network resources for each one of these things to be initiating its own additional network request at this point in the page and actually initiating a fresh request. And you can improve that by moving it into the headers, but still it's a delay, and it can create a waterfall. This is a Vue component. And this Vue component is an extremely simple one. By the way, I love Vue partly because it does prioritize the languages of the web. So you have something which looks like HTML and should be valid HTML, and something which looks like CSS and is CSS, and something you can also add a script element, which is JavaScript. And so this gets rendered by the Vue compiler. I'm talking about Vue, but this also applies, and I've implemented as a proof of concept in React as well. So if you're interested in style inlining and you want to explore this in the React world, please let me know. I'd happily share my code or create a library if that would be useful to you. But when Vue renders that component, it embeds some metadata about the file it comes from and the chunk that it will be part of in the build. So this source file becomes the __ file part of this single file component. And when the chunks of the build, by the way, if it doesn't, if like the internals of me talking about chunks becomes too boring for a while, just think of a cat. But this we can match up when we are processing the chunks of the build. We can say, okay, in this chunk we have these source files. And when this chunk is rendered, we can match that up with some information from the chunk. And so as part of the build output, we get this manifest, which matches the resources to the chunks in the source files. We also inject with our bundler now in this case this is done by the Vue compiler, but it can also be done by a bundler as well. We inject a registration point. So when this component is rendered, it injects the same ID into a set, which is attached to the rendering context on the server. I should have said that. And that means that after we finish rendering the HTML for the page, we have a list of every component that has been rendered into that HTML. which means we can actually track back and find all of the CSS that matches that component. Now, the benefit of the way it's been done here is we can actually extract as strings the CSS from every component into a map, which maps the source file to an import that will resolve to CSS at runtime. And then our renderer can just map that across and actually render it out. So we get something that takes this list of CSS files and replaces the CSS files, which are effectively would be dynamically associated with components on that page, with inline CSS that is directly relevant to those components. And this, we think, this kind of thing is not straightforward. You can put too much CSS in the HTML. It's not cacheable. It's part of the document, so you run the danger of inflating the document size. But we think it's a good trade-off for the components that would be not global CSS, but the components that can be dynamically imported and are part of a render. And we do that in Nuxt already. It's not a capability in Vue itself, but I have also implemented it in React, if you're interested. And I think it would be trivial to implement in most other server-rendered UI libraries. That's our first thing. Oh. How did he get here? He's constantly showing up. So the second problem was INP, which we all were made sadder by the introduction of INP as a core web vital, or far from it actually. INP revealed the sadness that already existed, as we heard just 2 talks ago. The fact that people were experiencing slowness. And we had a very interesting, and this Rick actually tweeted a few months before coming in, sort of calling out the framework. See, with this image, he said, come on, get going. We need to improve the INP. And we actually had a user, some users raise the point, a very paradoxical point with Nuxt, that they were seeing a real INP slowdown in the most performant build of our app, of a Nuxt website. Now, let me tell you something about one of the things we do. We offer a full static build. This is similar in some ways to, I think, what Next.js does, in that we can extract data that's dynamic at build time. So for example, imagine you are creating a UI that displays a list of GitHub repos and maybe some metadata for each one, and maybe even the contents of the README file for every Git repo. Now that is going to be a lot of network requests. And so if you want to do that at runtime, you're going to be building a backend, you're going to be optimizing it, you're going to be dealing with caching. You can also do this at build time and basically take all of that data. And if you need it to be interactive, you can create this payload of data. And so we actually serialize it in JSON into something which is a payload.json. It's serialized. It looks like this. It uses a library called dvalue from Rich Harris. And basically this kind of thing, the numbers refer to other keys, and the strings refer to a way of deserializing the data. So we can deserialize very rich data. So we can recreate dates. We can actually create components, deserialized components, and lots of things. And basically, that kind of data turns into this kind of dynamic object. That's just by the by. The problem is, this is the weird thing. Can anyone tell me why, in our static build, where we are not performing data fetching, we had a higher INP than our runtime server site, where people were clicking a button and waiting for who knows how long for the data to come back from an API. That was much slower. People would click the button, they would wait for a second, 2 seconds to get to the next page. Surely that would be worse. Whereas with this, they were clicking and they were getting there within 50 milliseconds, but the INP was worse. Why? It was synchronous. Exactly, because we actually prefetched the payloads. We had them ready to go. We were going as we wanted to have as performant a website as we possibly could. And so what we were able to do is actually inject into our builds a hack. Not a hack. We actually built in the opportunity for the browser to respond to user action. So the actual click the button can, or the link can now get the focus, or whatever the browser needs to do, whatever paint has to happen, can happen. And we're able to do that by integrating with the bundler to detect the kind of, so we only do this, for example, if a page has been pre-rendered. That was something that wasn't intuitive to me. That's probably why I should come to more of these conferences. And there are more opportunities to do the same. But that was one that we didn't expect. Here's another. Mandy gave a great talk earlier, so this probably won't come as any surprise. But if you have, and I chose to pick her font, if you have a web font that loads, it can obviously create cumulative layout shift like this. And we've actually built something that enables almost not all, a lot of what Mandy talked about to be done at build time, in fact, as part of the bundling process. So we can get the benefit of this. So these are metrics just generated by Nuxt as part of the build process, to mean that when you're using a custom web font, you don't experience the CLS penalty that you might otherwise experience. So there are some problems that we would, I would say, exist in the custom web font space, and I won't go into them because Mandy's covered them so well. This is what we do at a bundler level. We take that component, and it can be a component or it can just be ambient CSS or anything. It can even be in a CSS variable. If someone references a font family, we will generate a font face for it. And we created a library called Unifont, which is abstracted, works in any framework, which allows unified access to web font APIs from Adobe to Google Icons to Bunny to FontSource to FontShare, and allows you to create your own custom ones, which you can use. But I would really like it if you would submit a PR and add the font CDN to the library. But it basically allows, we query these providers to find one which matches the font, if one exists. And if it does, we can actually directly render the data from that font CDN in the CSS file. So we don't need to add a link to an external file. We can actually transform it so it's actually part of the user's CSS. What's more, in the background, in development mode, we create a proxy so that when this hash is queried, _fonts hash, it actually pulls down from the font CDN. And when you build your app, it includes it as part of your app. So you don't have third-party connections. You don't have the need to face any potential privacy issues. We thought that was quite a useful thing to be able to do. And we also control, therefore, how many different weights are included, or if variable fonts are required, that can also be configured. So all of this is, most of this is zero config. So all of this just happens. The moment you use Oswald in the CSS, this occurs. But then we also notice what the fallback is. So if it's sans serif or a particular font, we then go a little bit further than just size adjust and create a custom one-to-one mapping between those two font metrics to generate something which should, as much as possible, map the size of the fallback font to the font that you're using, the custom web font. And so that actually means that you should get the experience I showed you a moment ago that was created with Nuxt fonts, again, with the user not having to do anything at all, the developer not having to do anything at all. Obviously, it works with custom providers. You can also do exactly the same thing just by dragging a font file into your public directory in the project, which means that there are lots of people who don't need to listen to Mandy's talk. Actually, they should still listen to Mandy's talk, because there's much more there. But it's a way of rolling out these performance insights and these capabilities into absolutely every developer who uses it without them having to be an expert or know anything about how to calculate these font overrides. And also, when they change their usage or they delete the font, the CSS that's been generated is up to date. It's no legacy code left in their app. I was pretty happy about that. Here's something I built just a couple of weeks ago, which is why it's marked as experimental. As part of the build for Nuxt in particular, but this is true of any framework which has asynchronous processing, particularly asynchronous processing which doesn't always have to run. So we have the concept of async data. this is the data which gets put into that payload I talked about earlier, and cached and prefetched. So it's available. So the link is on the page. We can either prefetch on visibility, or we can prefetch on interaction, like hovering or clicking. And we can, and so the data is there the moment the mouse lets go, or the enter button is pressed, or whatever. So but this is run at generate time. So actually, none of the code required to perform that fetch, and it might not be a fetch, it might also be a complex data processing. It might be some kind of syntax highlighting. Heaven forbid, please don't put that in your client-side code. It's much better off in a server component or something like that, but people are doing it in their client-side code, and this is being included in their bundle for a zero likelihood situation. Not totally zero. They can manually refresh it. They might have a preview mode or something like that, where they want a developer to be able to go in and see the most up-to-date data. So what we were able to do is perform this kind of transform. So this is what happens normally when Vue compiles the app, but this is more human readable. It sticks it in a component. There's a setup function which gets called, and inside the setup function we perform this step. And use async data in a static site doesn't call the function. It just returns the data. So why not extract the whole function into a separate file, which can be dynamically imported? This means at build time, it becomes a different chunk. And it means if you never call it, that chunk never gets loaded by the browser, never gets prefetched. It's just, as far as the user is concerned, as far as the user's browser is concerned, it's not part of the build. And so we're able to do exactly that. And this, it's experimental, but it will be going into next versions of Nuxt when users are creating static sites, because I think there's very little downside to it. Testing on one particularly bad website, we saw a decrease of 39% of total JavaScript and a decrease of 66% of the unused JavaScript on the website. I am going to take the anti-JavaScript JavaScript club sticker for that, if nothing else. You are very kind. That's not all. We heard earlier today about how, well, not just today. I mean, even the unconference before, we were talking about the pain of third-party scripts and how they decrease responsiveness. It's one of the biggest problems in evaluating web performance. For example, I want to look at HTTP archive data and see how Nuxt websites are improving based on, or not improving, hopefully they're improving, based on new releases and performance improvements that we're shipping into the framework. But a lot of the data is muddied by the fact that I think the worst offenders in terms of site responsiveness seem to be third-party scripts. So we have some solutions for that. We recently released a Nuxt scripts integration, which does a number of things. It has built-in facade components, which are faster in synthetic testing. I don't have real-world data yet. It's too recent, but and it has functionality that we hope will enable users to replace things like Tag Manager with just the built-in capabilities of the framework, to load scripts on cookie consent, or manually trigger them only when required. It takes care of everything that users need, like adding pre-connect headers and integrity and so on. And we advise users not, actually, there might be, we advise users not to use Tag Manager, but. So there's some things that it can do, but particularly, I'm not here to talk about those. Bundling. We actually enable users to bundle scripts that they're using and actually take and optimize scripts from the third-party providers. This obviously doesn't work with all of them. Some require a particular origin, but we can actually bundle quite a lot of them. And so simply by setting bundle to true, the script will be downloaded at build time, made part of the build, and there will be no third-party request made at all in order to get the script working on the user's site. It will be included, again, a hash in the _scripts directory, and we even have plans to make remote code part of the actual build itself, so we can tree shake it and do other things like that. For example, when third-party scripts include polyfills that are not required by the user's target build of their website. Here's another one. This wasn't working one day before I set off for the conference, and it is now working. So I'm going to tell you about it. And otherwise, it would have been 7 things I was telling you about. So, by the way, this also, it's totally possible it's just me. And I'm just, so if you're using a bundler that produces a lot of chunks, such as roll-up, Vite-based builds are often this is the case, but not only. You can find that a lot of bundlers can produce a lot of chunks, particularly as your site increases in size. There are multiple dynamic imports, multiple routes, which are normally code split, and then components and things that are shared across those routes can often end up as chunks on their own. And you can end up with something awful like this, where the moment you load this page, it starts downloading lots and lots and lots and lots of different files, because they're all going to be used in the first entry chunk. And so why not get started downloading them soon? And this kind of thing is terrible for performance. It can, at the worst case scenario, it can max out the request limit. And even at the best case, it's going to slow everything down. And it's a pain. So we can actually fix that. So we can, at the combination of bundle and a runtime, but running at build time, so in a pre-render phase, take all of those chunks out and use rollup at runtime, not really at runtime, to rebundle them based on the particular route that's being pre-rendered, knowing the components that will be required for that render, because remember, we keep track. We have a list of every component that's being used. We know every chunk that's going to be required on the client side, and we can actually smush them, that is a technical term in the bundler world, into one file which re-exports namespaces from each of the chunks. And then we can create an import map to remap each of those chunks to that single chunk. I feel like I've said chunk a lot. Are you with me? Do you? I think this is pretty cool, because it basically takes exactly the same code that's going to run in the user's browser, but just cuts all of the network requests down into a single one. And it doesn't have any downside in terms of additional navigation. So there's no duplication in terms of reloading the same chunk again. That has a cost, which is that you lose the caching of that initial chunk if you were to come back and hard reload another page. But I think the benefit is worth it. But I mean, these are all experiments, right? If I get off the stage and you come over and say, tap me on the shoulder, take me to one side and say, Daniel, you're not welcome here next year because that was a terrible idea, that's fine. But I think it has potential for being quite a useful thing in the bundler world, and particularly where we are generating lots of stuff to create something that is just optimized for that initial request. Because after all, in a hybrid SSR and SPA app, the subsequent navigations are not going to be incurring this initial cost of loading all of those chunks. Oh, the import maps. I just want to say, did you know you can use data URIs in import maps? I did not. I discovered that. So you can actually have, you can just embed the string of the module that you want and actually override any arbitrary actual module that would be imported from the web. That's pretty cool, right? So that is, I base 64 encoded it because it's a bit shorter, but you can just URI encode it as well, and it would read, basically import a hash from this underscore thing, the rebundled, and then export the hash.default, export default hash.default. So it's just single re-exporting that particular namespace. Here's another project. I don't know if you know, maybe you probably do. Have you ever come across any of the libraries that I have scrolling across the screen in a marquee tag? No need for JavaScript for that. I really appreciate you, whoever that was in the back who laughed really loudly. So there are loads and loads of libraries in the ecosystem that exist to support particular features that didn't at one point exist in the language, but which totally are unnecessary now for most of us in most of the environments we are running in or creating code to run in. These things are all native None of this needs a package, or any more than a package which re-exports a native utility. And so this is a bundler integration, unplugin, purge polyfills. Unplugin, who here has heard of unplugin? Unplugin is a library we developed as part of building Nuxt, which is generic. We've created a whole ecosystem, by the way, a GitHub org called un.js, which is full of libraries that are meant to be used by everyone. So in the Nuxt team, we're not particularly interested in building an empire of Nuxt. The whole fun of open source is doing stuff with other people. So, and any developer who becomes too attached to their tool loses track of what it is to be an artisan. The joy of building things is not the one tool, right? It's the fact that it's the you that's building them is able to exercise creativity and power to create something that achieves a purpose, right? That's the joy. But anyway, unplugin is a tool which enables you to write bundlers, plugins, like I've been talking about all the way through the talk, that run in Webpack, RSPack, ESBuild, Rollup, Vite, Farm, and future bundlers yet to come. So it's an agnostic wrapper around bundlers, which makes me excited. And basically, if it detects any of these in your tree, it actually replaces them with a native language utility. So it's powered by the work done by a group called E18E, which is about E18N, which is about ecosystem cleanup and innovation. They have their own website. Check them out. They have a Discord server. They're all about getting rid of cruft in NPM package trees, all about modernizing and improving dependencies, about speeding up libraries and CLIs in the JavaScript tooling world. Wonderful. Definitely check it out. And there's a library, module replacements, which we use in unplugin polyfills to make it possible to get rid of cruft and legacy code at the build stage. So it might not be a dependency you have, but for example, it would be possible to add moment.js support to this, so we actually just swap it out at build time with something that does an equivalent thing, but using language features. That's totally possible. If you want to do it, I'd love a PR. Because we don't just have to say that these problems exist out there, we can actually fix them, and in a lot of ways, very real and profound ways, at the bundler level, until the ecosystem catches up. There's more. I do think it's important to skip JavaScript when it's not needed. And so since the release of Nuxt 3, we've supported a single flag for generating a multi-page app site with no JavaScript. But you can also do it on a much more granular level and say, these routes, these parts of the website should not have any JavaScript. These ones do, because they are going to be I don't know, there could be a dashboard or something like that. And you can do the same in terms of certain bits should be static and certain bits should be server rendered, and certain bits should be cached and certain bits should be run at runtime. And certain bits should be server components. You just need to take a page and add a .server.view, and it will be processed by the bundler differently, and it will create static HTML with no runtime component. And you can even embed little islands of interactivity in these server pages and components, because I think we do need to reduce JavaScript usage if we can. So where next? We're releasing two new, I'm sorry, this is not about bundlers, but just very briefly. We're releasing two new modules, Nuxt Hints and Nuxt Accessibility. And Nuxt Hints aims to, in the next few months, Nuxt Hints aims to surface the kind of performance improvements that we've been talking about today. Stuff like your image doesn't have an explicit width and height. You should probably use the Nuxt component that will produce those for you based on your source image. Or your largest contentful paint in this dev server load was here, and it was at this time, and here's what the component you need to edit, and stuff like that. You lack a lang attribute on your HTML. You should really have a title for this page. I don't know, all the boring stuff that we require. And we also have an accessibility module, which will integrate with our dev tools and actually surface. Obviously, most of accessibility can't be automated, but we'll surface the parts of accessibility that we can reliably detect in an automated way, actually at not just at build time, which we can fail the build, but we can also surface that when the user is actually developing the site, so that it doesn't become this circle of build, 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 build. Oh, wait, let's check the performance testing tools. Why is it so bad? And then people try and make it as optimize as much as they can, try and fix the accessibility bugs. Actually, they probably don't get to the accessibility bugs. They're just the performance ones, and then ship it because they've run out of time. We don't want that to be the story of people using Nuxt. But the main thing is experimentation, because all of these things are only a hypothesis and a possible solution. We need data, and actually, really, we need continued conversation at the performance level, so that frameworks aren't innovating in a vacuum to try and solve problems in the wrong ways, but that we're hearing from performance experts who can tell us what the problems are and collaboratively seek to solve them in a way which will benefit not just a small proportion of users, but users who don't even know they're benefiting from the solutions we're deploying. If you're interested in Nuxt in particular, I would be delighted to hear from you. You can visit nuxt.com or find us on Blue Sky. There's a Discord server too. I should say I have an open diary. If anyone ever wants to chat to me, visit my website, ro.dev chat, and you can book it's only a 10-minute call, but feel free to book it totally freely. If you want to get involved in open source, maybe you're a consultant, you've been, you're an expert in lots of ways, but you would like to contribute back either to Nuxt or some other project, let me know. I would love to help. I can tell you about the open source perspective and whatever. Or maybe you just want to book a call to tell me that I should definitely do something differently, and I would love that as well. So do get in touch. And we probably have a time for a question or two. But it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It has been an honor.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was wonderful. I hope you feel welcome here, because you're very welcome here.
I feel very welcome here. Thank you.
So we have a lot of questions, actually. People are very interested in this topic.
Is that why you told me I was welcome up front?
Yes. No, no, just kidding. Well, there is one vaguely spicy question that we can just get out of the way immediately, which is, why did you choose the name Nuxt, considering next has kind of a negative association with it?
So there's so much to go in there. The first is that I didn't pick it. So I started open source in 2019, 3 years after Nuxt was created, and which I've loved. It's been an amazing journey, and basically just contributing back as much as I can until I was asked to be on the core team, and then I was asked to lead it. So it's been a fun journey. But I didn't create it. But I can tell you the name came from Vue versus React. So the U in Vue became the U in Nuxt, if the E in React became the E in Next. And in 2016, when Nuxt was created, none of the things that the web performance community might have been saying about meta frameworks were being said, I think. So I'm not sure there was much. I will say, at least one website has been built in Nuxt because the person who commissioned it had an Australian accent and asked for a Next website. And the agency heard Nuxt. So I'm going to say it was a very strategic move. And it's already paid off at least once.
I love it. So another question that was asked was about some of the other kind of frameworks and meta frameworks that are out there. It seems as though Nuxt is sort of heading in the same direction as frameworks like Astro, which are very much no JavaScript first with islands architecture. Whoop, whoop, islands. And yeah, folks are curious. Like, what are your thoughts on that? It seems like you're kind of learning from each other in this space right now.
Yeah, I think with any ecosystem with established tooling and then rival or competitor tooling coming in, you see that either things, so sometimes new frameworks come in, bring an innovation that gets adopted, and sometimes adoption doesn't happen, and the existing dinosaurs perish. So there's different ways of happening. So I'm absolutely listening very carefully. I think I'm particularly inspired by some of the stuff from Quick. I'm really interested to see how that comes into Angular and starts being open source out of Wiz. So a lot of the ways Wiz, which is an internal, I'm sure everyone knows, an internal framework within Google, those innovations are coming into Angular. And I'm really looking forward to adopting some of those as well. And Astro takes the opposite approach to Nuxt, but we're approaching the same point. Right. So Astro takes the sort of static with islands of reactivity, and we take the idea of we always want a runtime by default, and we have islands of static inside there. So whether or not you think there should be a default runtime is the choice. But in terms of the level of that runtime, at the moment it's something like 90 kilobytes, including Nuxt and Vue and all of our dependencies. As in that's a minimal Nuxt website. But that's going to go down with the introduction of Vue Vapor, which is coming shortly, which will support Vue not having a runtime, and basically compiling to imperative DOM changes.
Sorry. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it kind of feels like there's this pendulum swing that's happened where everything was on the server, everything was on the client, and it's swinging back to somewhere in the middle where a lot of people are realizing that, totally on the server doesn't work for everything, totally on the client doesn't work for everything, and we need to have this kind of balanced approach. So I'm excited to see the ways that Nuxt is approaching that.
I would actually tweak that analogy, because I think often people think of it as a pendulum, but I think of it in terms of a yo-yo in the hands of a person walking up a flight of stairs. Because things appear to be going from pole to pole, but actually things are getting better consistently along the way. So we're not going back to a world where there is no JavaScript and everything is just server rendered. Like, we have the capacity to deliver sites that are more performant because they have that could deliver a better user experience because they have JavaScript, or they're using Vue transitions where they can, so they don't need to adopt. But we're better off than we were, is what I'm saying.
I agree. I like that tweak to it. Jason Grigsby had a question about the inline CSS for Nuxt. Does it take into consideration the positioning of the component on the page? Like, e.g., is it just an above the fold CSS, or does it look at the entire page?
It doesn't take into account the position of that element on the page. The trade-off is we don't know. We're operating with a limited amount of information, and in order to get better information, we would have to potentially do something which is non-performant on the server side, which is somehow render it. I would be up for doing something like marking an element with an HTML attribute that says, like, this is what we care about, so render this. And in fact, that's already possible right now manually. So the inline CSS feature can be enabled not just with a Boolean, but it can be enabled with a function which returns true or false as to whether a file should have the CSS extracted. So you can say, like, for my hero components, I want those, but I don't want other ones. So it's possible, but I mean, ideally, we'd like it to be less friction than that.
Yeah, makes sense. The next question, I think actually this is a really good one, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is so, right now there's really no standardized way to measure the performance of spas and to compare hard navigations versus soft navigations. And is that something that you, as a maintainer, do you have your own internal performance tooling that you rely on, or ways that you're managing, measuring, spa navigation performance or advice that you can give to the community on what you think we might do?
From the point of view of some kind of Core Web Vitals or
yeah,
Lighthouse
or
score,
or even, did Core Web Vitals even realistically map to a soft navigation.
It's so difficult, isn't it? But I mean, INP is not enough, because INP is just, there's now a response to the click. It doesn't mean that there's then like the actual full navigation. And you know, some sites will, so there are of course ways of measuring these things, right? So you can have mutation observers, you can have performance measurements, and you can collect that data. It's very hard, obviously, in development. The conditions are very different from production. So most of the time when you're developing a site, the data you're seeing does not map to what is going to be the case in production. You know, Vite, for example, which is the bundler most Next users will be using, will be compiling on demand the page when the link is clicked. So you know, it's very different.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're doing the best we can.
Yeah. It's like what Harry said yesterday.
I'm
The difference between development and production is a huge gap right now, and it's a huge problem.
I'm really keen to see better tooling in terms of being able to talk about the difference, because sometimes it's a lot of these things impact people's feel and how you like even things like the View Transitions API, native View Transitions, make a huge difference in how people feel about a navigation, even when the navigation is actually technically slower.
It's the perception.
So it feels to them like it's smooth. And so it's a very difficult thing to measure. But
Awesome.